Canned cocktails have become all the rage as of late.
I don't taste any alcohol in here, and that's kind of scary.
In 2022, spirits took over beer as the market share leader in the US. Premixed cocktails are the second largest spirit by volume, growing nearly 25% from 2022 to 2023. High Noon is by far the biggest, having done over $400 million in sales in 2024. But new players are constantly upending the market. Take Surfside, for example. This iced tea and vodka drink sold $500,000 worth of product back in May of 2024. By August, that number crossed $2 million.
Think of a tailgate occasion. Think of a barbecue, or you're at the beach. It's not the best place to bring your 750 milliliter bottle of liquor and all your mixers to make a cocktail yourself. And yet having it in a can allows you to eat into those occasions that are normally beer.
Spirit companies from Absolut to Bacardi are naturally capitalizing on the trend too. But so are some of the largest names in beer, like Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors.
What's interesting is that once the big players, the big brewers, the big distillers get in on the action, you know that there's a trend here that they're trying to capitalize on with consumers.
That's pretty interesting. I am not familiar with these latest ones that they're referencing. I have seen these before. I actually don't really drink that much myself, so I haven't been encountering these all that much. But it makes sense to me that you would have a mixed beverage in a can or a bottle, and then you can just easily access it. As they mentioned, you might not always be in a location where you want to do that. I think the most common places I've seen things like this are, when you're at a party somewhere and you just want to have some things prepped for a guest. You don't want to have people going around like mixing drinks necessarily, or have somebody keeping track of that, or allow people to just access liquor on their own. And so you can just hand them a can of something that's already mixed, or you can lay it out with an assortment of other beverages as well. So the convenience factor makes a lot of sense. I think for a lot of products, making the customer's life more convenient is the value add and will increase profits. And there have been some pretty impressive numbers that they've already highlighted on some of the growth of these products so far.
Is a canned Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. Want to give it a try?
Let's do it. Oh, man. That
Packs a punch. The ready-to-drink market of alcoholic beverages has been on the rise for decades. In the 80s, wine coolers were popular. A decade later, alcopops like Smirnoff Ice and Bacardi Breezers took off.
Synonymous with the 90s generation and synonymous with the rave culture, all of these kind of fluorescent colors, fluorescent artificial ingredients, all of that fitted that narrative and that demographic. That lasted for a few years.
The 2000s ushered in an era of craft beer, but ready-to-drink regained its footing in 2016.
That's for sure. I would definitely remember the 2000s as being craft beer. That used to be all the rage, finding some random niche beer company and bringing some of their latest brews, seeing what they were like, comparing them to other ones. That definitely is pretty reminiscent. I think also seltzers. I'm not sure if that's the next category that they're going to call out, but I feel like those also became pretty big somewhat recently, maybe just before this one, or is maybe part of this category that they're referencing.
With the introduction of White Claw. For the next 5 years, their popularity soared.
Yeah, this is exactly the one that I was thinking of. This one was pretty popular fairly recently. Like, they're also showing 2020, 2021. It's just the beginning of 2025 right now, so that's only a few years ago, considering they had the original categories as 90s, early 2000s. Those are about 10 year. That's about a decade is what I was expecting. And so White Claws, I would have expected to be firmly in this category. And these were some of the things I was thinking of as people seem to gravitate towards these in the recent years that I've noticed.
So much so that the brand was struggling with a supply shortage in 2019. White Claw hard seltzers peaked in 2022.
Around that time, you had a plethora of new brands coming in, an oversaturation of new flavor sophistication initiatives, so many flavors that essentially started devaluing the core proposition of the brands. Consumers started getting confused and they started taking a step back. By last year, that would accelerate into essentially more or less a collapse of the hard seltzer category.
At least a collapse of skyrocketing growth. It's still a huge
That's interesting. I didn't know that, but that is a pretty recent time frame for that to have happened, that I'm not keeping that close of an eye on alcoholic beverage trends. But that makes sense. Yeah, spirit-based drinks still doubled from 2021 to 2023. So it does seem to be a fairly large category at this point. But this might also include some of the newer mixed drink segments that they've highlighted.
huge market. From 2021 to 2023, spirit-based ready-to-drink doubled its market share in the US. Malt-based beverages like a White Claw or Twisted Tea are still the dominant players. Malt-based drinks are made with alcohol fermented from sugar rather than a spirit. This is a US-centric phenomenon. About 90% of its consumption takes place in the US. A big reason for that is in the US, they are taxed like beer, which is lower than spirits.
In college, they're cheap. It's kind of like, all right, like I'll drink it. It has.
I see. Okay, so that's the difference. I assumed that those were spirits, but it makes sense that they're aiming for a cheaper demographic, or a more cost-sensitive demographic. Also, it's amusing just to see that basically for this investigation that they're doing, they seem to have a bunch of 20-something-year-olds just drinking some various alcoholic beverages in an office space over here in order to highlight how these trends are progressing. So this is probably a pretty cool job for this individual. I feel like I've seen him in a lot of new, trendier things. So it's fun to see. They didn't seem to have any older people around for this activity that they have here.
A bit of flavor in it. I'll enjoy myself. Now you graduate to more better taste for a higher price.
And of course, there are some cultural considerations as well.
Europeans or other nations around the world, we do not call alcohol hard. We don't use the adjective hard to describe alcoholic drinks. And additionally, on top of that, we do not call sparkling water seltzer. So trying to explain to a European what a hard seltzer is was an exercise in futility from the beginning.
Ready-to-drink spirits, on the other hand, are popular globally. They're essentially pre-mixed cocktails with real liquor, like a vodka or tequila as its base. Pre-mixed cocktails started taking off in 2022 and have grown exponentially since then. In 2024, spirit-based ready-to-drink volume is up about 650% in the US compared to 2019.
I think
That was a huge percentage. I'm just going to go back here. 645% increase in spirit-based ready-to-drink beverages in the US. They said since 2019, so about a 4 or 5 year span, depending on the exact time they got this info. But that's huge. That's such a large market, which makes sense. It's a new segment of the market that they're entering into. One of the things that comes to mind for me on this is, at first thought, it seems obvious that you would have a mixed drink in a bottle or in a can. And it's odd that this hasn't happened sooner. But on the other side, something that comes to mind is, I believe, one of the hard parts about manufacturing, especially with potentially dangerous substances. So I think, as an example, vitamins might be something that you don't think of as particularly dangerous. But certain vitamins can have excessive amounts or lead to poisoning in some cases. So take something like iron, for example. It's something that you need. We all will require a certain amount, but you can have iron poisoning if you have way too much of it. And so this makes it hard for manufacturers of supplements to make sure that they're not having any issues with variability in those ingredients. So in all manufacturing processes, there's a margin of error. And so for something physical, this would be like the size of something being a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. This sometimes might be something that you witness yourself when you go to assemble a product, or you even buy 2 or 3 of the same product and there's just something slightly different about them, especially when you look at like the hinges or how things exactly match up, because there's always that margin of error in them. When you do this for substances or things that are going to be ingested, that can be dangerous. So that's where, or for pharmaceuticals, for instance. So if you have a substance and it could be dangerous to have 50% extra or 2x extra, that could be a problem. And so I would expect alcohol to be in that category where you likely don't want to add 2 times as much vodka or gin or some other hard liquor into a particular bottle, because this could also span into, again, since manufacturing is at a large scale, this could be somebody gets an entire pack of these that has maybe 2x the amount of alcohol as the label says, and then somebody has like 0 or half or something like that. And so this could be dangerous for that individual because they might be thinking I'm having 1 or 2 drinks, but that could actually be 2 to 4 drinks. And so that can add up very quickly and have negative consequences to it. And so this might be one of those factors. It seems odd to me that people wouldn't have just thought of making mixed drinks and putting them into a can, considering people have been getting mixed drinks, I would assume, for hundreds of years, pretty much since the creation of hard liquors. I don't know exactly when they started, but for sure I would expect this has been a long, long time in the making for somebody to have missed this opportunity if there wasn't some hurdle or barrier to entry here.
In the US compared to 2019.
I think there's an interesting trend where hard seltzers actually set up the playing field for canned cocktails. It sort of primed the consumer to be out and looking for something in a can that they enjoyed consuming. And then it sort of turned into this trend where now they're looking for a canned Moscow Mule, a canned margarita, a canned Paloma.
Let's try the espresso martini. So this is 13% alcohol. Just for reference.
Again, it's just hilarious for me to see that somebody is paying these 20-something-year-olds they just showed the animation of them, just the montage of opening can after can after can. I'm sure they must have had a couple retakes considering how much they've been drinking here, but I would have extended this myself. If this was back in my younger years, this segment would have taken me like a month. We would have had to just keep buying cases, hang out with my coworkers, say that all of us are working. This seems like such a fantastic job if you're into this activity.
A High Noon was 4.5%. Wow. Dangerous. The 3 biggest players, High Noon.
And see what he mentioned there? So one of those beverages is about 13% compared to one of the High Noons that they have previously mentioned of about 4%. And so this is where things can get dangerous, as he mentioned, because again, if you accidentally 2x that value, that gets really bad pretty quickly. And so people could be ingesting more alcohol than not. Though that previous individual seemed to highlight that maybe it was a market timing thing of the introduction of hard seltzers paved the path and made people interested in these options. But that is pretty curious to me, especially considering like hard lemonades or hard ciders have been on the market for a number of years, which weren't just like beer. And so it seems like it should have been able to come to market sooner, but maybe it was just a market timing and a expectation from consumers that was hindering this from becoming big sooner.
Cutwater and Neutral control more than half of the US ready-to-drink spirits market. High Noon is owned by Gallo, a winery that owns brands such as Barefoot and Andre. Cutwater and Neutral are owned by beer giant Anheuser-Busch.
When you think about how these brands behave, they're actually far closer to how beer brands behave in the sense of the velocity at which they go through, how they're going to dominate the cold box, therefore how are you merchandising, retailing it, etc. And when you have a company that maybe plays in a little bit more of that space like ABI, you're able to port through those learnings.
Big Beer has traditionally fought against getting spirit-based cocktails onto supermarket shelves because they don't want to relinquish that shelf space. But now what you're seeing is a reversal of policy. They want those products because now they have them in their own portfolios.
But while ready-to-drink spirits are a booming business, there is some skepticism as to its lasting impact on the biggest beer manufacturers.
I think that what they are very good at is beer. They are also very financially driven companies. My question always is, are they prepared to make a long-term financial investment in a brand from the ground up in order to expand it in a patient fashion? And so far, I haven't seen much evidence of that.
An outlier in the brewer space is Sam Adams' producer, Boston Beer. It's a smaller player compared to giants like Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors. However, 90% of its US sales are coming from Beyond Beer, which includes popular brands like Angry Orchard, Twisted Tea, and Truly. At the height of the hard seltzer craze, Boston Beer's stock soared, then tumbled as malt beverage growth.
Wow, that's quite the trajectory for them. They 6x'd their price basically just between 2020 to 2021, and then 2021 to 2022 basically went back down. That is quite the wild ride that they were on at that time. And this can happen to any company. This is why people have these gut reactions to things like stock prices, etc., is because sometimes people can get very enthusiastic about something, like a new product comes out and they say, wow, this is going to be amazing. To some extent, this is why bubbles exist, is because people get overly excited about something new and then they kind of assume that that growth or that optimism is just going to keep going really, really quickly. I think an example of that would be AI. I think in recent times is definitely something that seems true in this case. Obviously, you can go back to that .com bubble where basically just having .com made your stock price soar and then subsequently crash. And this is a similar scenario where as things are new, there seems to be a lot of possibilities. Growth is potentially infinite at this point in time, and then cutbacks occur when people realize that while it might still be a nice thing, obviously internet companies were still useful. They helped pave the way for a lot of things. Amazon being one of those companies that lived through the .com bubble and is still a very big player today. And AI, I would consider in the same bucket. While there is a lot of excess hype about it, it's going to be one of those tools that likely we're just going to be using. This was one of the big shifts that led into the AI market as well, as somewhat of a tangent, is that those tools became much more readily available, and then people started using them, and then we got a bunch of companies that started to spring up that leveraged it, and then now people are starting to get a little bit more hesitant around how valuable these things are and how much they can grow. And this is a similar situation here, which is people saw the new adoption of this new type of product and said, wow, this is fantastic. This company is going to the moon and we need to hop on board before we miss out. And then they realized it's just one of many beverages. It's not going to be a game changer in the market. Even though consumers are going to change their shopping behavior, it's not like this one company is just going to take over 100% market share overnight because of this.
Slowed back in 2021. The company dumped millions of unsold cases of Truly that year.
We were very aggressive about, adding capacity, adding inventory, buying raw materials like cans and flavors, and frankly, we overbought. And when the growth stopped, we had more of all those things than we were going to be able to use.
And in line with the broader market trend, Truly has now moved into the vodka soda business as well. With big beer companies seeing beer sales on the decline, expanding portfolios is top of mind.
But 90% of the conversations I have with all of these guys, and I do have conversations with all of these guys throughout the years, they tend to be about what they call Beyond Beer. Beyond Beer includes RTDs, non-alcoholic, all of that beer adjacent segments. The interest is 100% there.
But it may take more to convince investors. This stock chart shows the growth, or lack thereof, that Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors have experienced since 2019 compared to the S&P 500.
That is interesting because here you can clearly see that there is a decline for them in a similar time frame where the previous company who was focusing on hard seltzers and other different types of beverages in that alcoholic and spirit case, and they skyrocketed then came back down, but these have just been sort of steadily declining, which generally makes sense. Obviously, there has to be, if there's a winner, there has to be a loser in some cases. Hopefully there's many situations where there can be multiple winners, but at the end of the day, that new beverage type was taking market share from somebody else, and these were obviously the big beer companies, so they were the ones who were losing market share at this point, and it makes sense that they started to get onto the trend to kind of stop that decline.
the stocks really haven't done much of anything. So you have a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year trend of beyond beer growth, which has been pretty exponential, but these companies' stock prices have done very little during that time frame. So, they're not participating in it.
That's because, despite the massive success of brands like Cutwater, the ready-to-drink category is still a relatively small part of the big beer business. It represents less than 5% of the total sales for Anheuser-Busch, who owns 2 of the top 3 premix cocktail brands. It's about 7% of sales for Molson Coors.
But nothing has really stuck enough to override the decline of light beer. So investment in capabilities is one thing, but actually having strong brands that you're building over time in a slow fashion that's sustainable over years to come is something completely different.
In the case of Molson Coors, their biggest foray here was Simply Spiked, which was using the Simply orange juice brand in partnership with Coke. It had a great first year. Typical poster child of what happens when you do this. You get a lot of trial, and then in year 2, it doesn't get the repeat that you expect. So sales are declining.
Coca-Cola's recent investment in the alcoholic beverage space started in Japan back in 2018 with its Lemon Dao beverage. Since then, it's leveraged its soft drink brands with a variety of alcoholic players. In addition to Simply Spiked, Molson Coors produces its Topo Chico hard seltzers and ready-to-drink cocktails. Jack Daniel's owner Brown-Forman partnered with Coca-Cola and debuted a canned version of a bar classic in U.S. markets last year.
I mean, I feel like this tastes more like I made it myself in my backyard. Like, I don't know if this is fancier.
I think that's what they're going for.
Everyone knows what a Jack and Coke is. Everyone knows what a vodka soda is. It's a very different proposition than trying to explain to someone what a mango white claw is. Gives consumers something they have already and potentially always have been doing. And I think that has the potential to give them a little bit longer longevity.
U.S. alcohol as an industry, despite the share price performance that we've seen today, is an attractive industry. It's a high margin industry. So if there was ever a market that you were to try this, U.S. would sort of be it in a meaningful way where we've seen most of the splash.
It kind of tastes like a fruit punch to me, like one of those ones you with the bendy straw.
Really? Oh, okay. While premixed cocktails is the fastest growing segment within the U.S. spirit industry, it's still the smallest segment by revenue. There have been some difficulties in reaching its true market potential.
There's definitely some headwinds for canned cocktails, getting them onto shelves at grocery stores, at convenience stores. I mean, there's a reason why you can't just pick up a handle of vodka at your local CVS, right? Unless you're in the state of California, because it's a state-by-state measure. A lot of it has to do with consumer protections. There's different tax implications state by state. So the industry is currently in DC trying to navigate all of that from a policy standpoint.
Plus, the ready-to
As that previous individual mentioned, it sort of tasted like, they mentioned like the bendy straw, like fruit punch, I'm assuming, some type of drink. So I would expect this to be for kind of those college students, maybe people who are just out of college. Because obviously if you're a more mature, have more time out of school, hopefully have some savings going on, you likely are just going to be able to get some of the real beverages and mix them yourself at your home. You're probably not at these larger party gatherings where it's just easier to have these in cans. And so you're likely going to want to have that experience more often than these. Like, I can't imagine somebody sitting at home or in a small group setting and choosing to have this experience of just having it in a can versus in an actual proper glass with your preferred version of that liquor. So for a lot of these kind of vodka or whiskey type beverages, I believe people usually focus in on variations. Even if you get like a Jack Daniel's, you might get like a 5-year versus a 10-year versus whatever. Maybe they have other nuances. And so you're going to be able to hyper focus on your specific favorite version of it. And so this does seem like it would be something for the younger crowd who doesn't really care. And this also seems like an easy situation and environment to skimp on the quality of the liquor would be my expectation, especially if it's already mixed. You're probably not going to really be able to tell the difference between a higher end vodka versus a lower end vodka to some extent. And so it seems ripe for cost optimization and kind of cutting quality, and maybe even keeping prices still pretty high for that mixed beverage feel. So it does seem like it would likely be for a particular niche market. I would expect either larger group gatherings or the younger crowd, and that's probably an overlap in those two segments would be my expectation.
To drink spirit space is crowded. You have traditional bar drinks like a vodka soda, but there's also canned martinis and cosmopolitans. There's just a lot more variety in the ready-to-drink spirit space compared to hard seltzers, and lots of room for differentiated competitors to keep entering the market, which also means that brand loyalty is hard to come by.
Investment is how you think about your canning lines. Do I have the canning lines at my brewery or at my facility to take the cans to put them in a multi-pack? That is not hard. What's really hard is creating brands that resonate with consumers.
The high churn rate comes from the fact that a lot of the entrants can be kind of faddish. So you get a lot of trial up front from the consumer, but the repeat isn't always there. And then the consumer goes to shop again, and there's 3 more choices on the shelf.
While some traditionally non-alcoholic players like Coca-Cola are entering the liquor space, the opposite is happening too. Alcohol brands are increasingly offering non-alcoholic options as younger generations are drinking less. One survey found that overall, more than 40% of Americans are trying to drink less alcohol.
In my mind, that I've described in the past as the Great Convergence.
That was actually a very respectable percentage. I'm just going to go back to that. They highlighted 41% are looking to drink less. So I think that's very commendable. Obviously, everyone needs to make their own choices. Everyone has their own vices that they partake in. But alcohol really isn't that healthy for you. And for me, it not being healthy, it being extra money that you're spending is like a double whammy for you. And so that's one of the big reasons why I don't partake as much anymore, is it just doesn't make sense in the long term to partake in something that can be negatively impacting your health and your financial situation. And so those are 2 things that I prioritize. Hopefully my health can stay as good as possible for as long as possible. And I would say same thing for my financial situation. I would expect most normal individuals to agree with that statement. They probably want to be healthy as long as they can, not have to worry about their bills as long as they can. And so this just seems to counter both of those 2 things, which are pretty core to my values, at least.
Drink less alcohol.
In my mind, that I've described in the past as the Great Convergence. That will lead us to this situation where we're talking about total beverage companies. And they will have as wide a portfolio as possible to tackle different drinking occasions, different need states the consumers have during the day, and they will try to use this breadth of a portfolio in order to be able to balance this extremely volatile world that we're facing right now.
Real milk in there.
I like that. That's good.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.